All right, we are live and we're recording. I'll go ahead and share my screen here. All right, and we'll give everyone just a minute to join us. Let people trickle in and get settled, and we'll get started in just a moment. All right, and we'll get started in just a moment, everyone.
There's always going to be a straggler or two.
Of course, yeah. We're at 21 so far, slowly going up. All right, should we get into this?
Let's go.
Okay, perfect. Well, I just want to welcome everyone. This is very exciting. We're going to get started and kick things off. Just a quick note, you'll see here you have a couple of these features available to you, the Q&A feature, as well as the raise hand feature. We're going to address all questions at the end of the presentation, but you can feel free to sprinkle those in throughout. And then at the end, if you have other questions that you would rather speak to the audience, you can raise your hand and we'll unmute you. So we're going to go ahead and move on, and we have a message from Greg Kapovich, the city's Community and Economic Development Director, and he's going to kick us off with a message.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Appreciate being here, everybody. Thank you for coming. This was advertised as a public hearing, so just in case we do have a quorum, as commissioners, planning commissioners and city councils were invited, we'll go ahead and open the public hearing at this time. Essentially, it's 5:02 on April 29th. And yes, welcome everybody. Happy to be here. It's my department, the CED department, that's typically charged with updating portions of the general plan. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you for taking your time out of your busy lives to attend this workshop. This is our first public outreach effort, and there will be more to come as we progress through this process. For those of you that took the survey already, thank you. That's very helpful. All of this is about getting feedback from the community so that we can plan a general plan that, number one, meets all the code requirements of the state and also is the vision of the community. The schedule tonight is a busy one. We're actually tackling two major topics, housing and safety. But we have a good team of internal staff members with Sherry Rep-Loadsman here and Lena Hernandez to act as your guide tonight. Dudek consultants, specifically Elizabeth Dixon, rounds out the team tonight. So you'll be hearing from each of them over the course of tonight. Essentially, the general plan represents the city's vision for future development. Today's discussion will allow staff to hear your ideas so we can create a more informed plan with strong public support. So with that, I'll turn it over to your very capable team to do just that. Elizabeth, I'll turn it over to you.
Absolutely. So I'm going to be your moderator tonight, just so everyone is aware. And we actually have a message from the Lomita Chamber tonight because they've been so kind to coordinate with us on this outreach event. So we're going to take a moment to hear from Heidi with the Lomita Chamber.
Thanks, Elizabeth. And thank you, Greg. On behalf of the Lomita Chamber of Commerce, welcome and congrats on your position with the City of Lomita. The Chamber's here tonight because it's our mission to help Lomita thrive and for our businesses to prosper. But this is not achieved solely by the Chamber of Commerce alone. The Chamber and the City of Lomita work together in a collaborative partnership that complements each other, yet we're two entirely different entities. A Chamber of Commerce is a private, member-run nonprofit association of businesses, professionals, and organizations that work together to advocate for and further the interests of businesses while connecting businesses within our community. A city is a public organization run by a city council elected by voters and has to address pretty much everything in our community, from public safety, quality of life, housing, transportation, economic development, and of course, much more. We thank the City of Lomita for bringing forward this opportunity to learn about the city's general plan and to provide input on the needs and priorities related to safety and housing for all members of our community, both residents and businesses. While safety is pretty clear, you may not think that housing would be a priority for businesses. However, this directly impacts our businesses in a number of ways, including the ability to attract employees who live locally to work here, to have a steady flow of local customers, and the opportunity to create diverse offerings of services that meet the needs of our residents. We love our bedroom community here in Lomita, but if everyone is living and leaving our city to spend their money elsewhere, then we've lost that revenue that would have gone towards supporting the services we all need to enhance the quality of life, keep our community safe, and keep the identity of Lomita strong. You'll be hearing more from the city about the housing needs and requirements as set forth by the state, but a sustainable, thriving economy needs a balance of housing and commercial development together. There could be opportunities for creative means to meet those housing needs while at the same time creating landmarks and magnets where residents are attracted to live, work, eat, shop, and play locally. A sustainable, thriving economy needs to address both housing and commercial needs, but planned in a balanced way over time. And when carried out thoughtfully, will also preserve the character of our community and what we love most about Lomita. The Chamber hopes to bring forward the voice of our business community with a strong focus on local economic improvement and further participation concerning the city's strategic vision for housing and safety. And I commend those of you who are here, those who choose to get involved with this process as the city faces the task of creating a resilient model to address housing and safety needs of Lomita. And I thank the city for this opportunity.
All right, thank you so much, Heidi. And next we have a message from Lina Hernandez for our Spanish-speaking participants tonight.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Lina Hernández y si le gustaría recibir información sobre los planes de viviendas y seguridad en español, favor de mandarme un correo electrónico y yo me comunicaré directamente con ustedes. Gracias.
All right, wonderful. Thank you, Lena. All right, so I know that Greg has already given us an introduction of some of our project team here, but I just wanted to touch on this a little bit more formally. And so going through from the city staff side, we of course have Greg Kapovich, who you heard from. He is the director of the Community and Economic Development Department. And then of course we have Sherry Rep-Loadsman, who is a planner with the city, and then Lena Hernandez, who's a management analyst with the city. And then from the consulting side, I'm Elizabeth Dixon. I am a planner and like I said, your moderator tonight. And then also I have my colleague with me tonight, Eric Williams, who is running the technical end of things. So if you have any issues with the Zoom software, please feel free to ask a question in the Q&A and we can help you with that on the back end. And other consulting staff, we have Veronica Tam Associates, who is a statewide expert on housing elements. And of course, other participants, we heard from Heidi with the Lomita Chamber. And then finally, you by being involved and taking this time out of your schedules to join us here today, you're key members of our team. Your voice and your perspective, they're really vital for informing the planning work that we do and really guiding us in understanding your needs and priorities. So thank you again for being here today. And then just a few high-level things before we get started. We're going to use some of the Zoom features here tonight, so I wanted to get you familiar with these. If you can view the green bar that you see here on the screen, it says you're viewing my screen, and next to it there's a View Options selection. If you want to go ahead and click that, and go ahead and click that Annotate feature, we're going to use this. So feel free to dive in. We just want to get everyone comfortable with participating tonight. And then once you click that, it's going to bring you to this, this new component that's called a whiteboard. And you have a few options here. The arrow's pointing at the text option, but there's also a draw and a stamp option. If you want to go ahead and click that text option, we have a quick question for you. Don't worry, it's not a test. All right, so we want to know what's your favorite thing to do in Lomita. So with that annotate feature, you can use the text and you can type right on the screen here, and we can all see what your favorite thing to do in Lomita is. Of course, normally if we were meeting in person, we'd have conversations about the weather. But, oh, the annotate feature is not working. Let's see. Okay, well, I'm not sure. Let's see, Eric, are we sure how to make the annotation feature work? It's okay, we can move on. We can also include these in the Q&A if you want to tell us what your favorite thing to do in Lomita is. The Q&A still works, but we do hope to get to use that feature later. But yeah, feel free to go ahead and, oh, someone did figure it out. Oh, we've got a couple figuring it out. Okay, awesome, look at that. All right, so people like to go out to eat. They like to go to the farmer's market. All right, wonderful. And I'll give you just another moment if anyone else wants to jump in there and, you know, have fun with this feature. If it isn't working for some, maybe it's possible that it's that you're joining from your phone. Maybe this feature isn't available and with those sorts of devices. All right, well, thanks for playing the game, everyone. I really appreciate it. And now we're gonna jump on into the next slide. And Greg's just going to give us an overview.
Yes, thank you so much. So, okay, tonight we're going to be breaking this up into 3 main sections plus a 4th for next steps. Lina Hernandez will lead us off tonight and give us an overview of the safety plan, what it is, risks that are kind of subject to the Lomita area, and then the plan's purpose. Then Sherry will do the same for the housing element. And then our 3rd step, which is the most important, and that's the discussion with all of you. So I want you and encourage you to ask questions, come up with ideas, essentially think out loud, because one thought can lead to many. And finally, we'll wrap up with the next steps. Next slide, please. So before I do hand it off to Lina, what is a general plan? Well, it's our bedrock. It's what and how we want the city to look like in the future. Typically, general plans last 25 to 30 years. Our last update was in 1998. So we're due. In addition to the housing and safety, which is what we're talking about tonight, other elements that make up the general plan are the land use, resource management, which is like open space, circulation, that's like traffic patterns and pedestrian orientation, noise, and of course, economic development. Generally, we base all of our rules and regulations towards achieving the goals and the vision of the general plan. So if the general plan's our vision, then the municipal code is our mechanism to get there. So with that, I will turn it over to Lina.
Great. Thank you, Greg, and everyone that's joined us today. I will be going over a high-level overview of what a safety element is and what the risks are in Lomita. So what is the safety element? The safety element is a plan used for identifying, reducing, preparing for, and responding to hazardous events. This plan lays out a set of goals, policies, and actions aimed to address Lomita's hazards risk accordingly. These include both natural and human-caused hazards, which, as you can see on the slide here, include air pollution, extreme heat, flooding, earthquakes, hazardous materials, wildfires, and the potential role of climate change. So what are Lomita's risks? First, let's understand how a risk is determined by defining the potential impact and the adaptive capacity of a hazard. The risk level is determined by looking at the potential impact over the next 20 years and the city's current capacity to adapt. A hazard's potential impact looks at how likely a hazard is to occur and how damaging it can be. The adaptive capacity is determined by how well the public is educated or prepared and takes into account the number of vulnerable people, the emergency alert and evacuation capacity, and important facilities to meet hazard reduction standards through building materials and structural requirements. In short, the adaptive capacity relates to community, governmental, and structural preparedness. As shown in this slide in red, the primary risks in Lomita are air pollution, seismic hazards, and extreme heat. And then getting back to what the safety element is addressing and some of the terminology we are using, the policies and actions are tailored to mitigate, prepare, respond, and recover from these hazards. As shown on the slide, we are defining some of the terminology that we use in the safety element. To mitigate means to reduce or stabilize the hazard. Preparedness is readiness in the event of an emergency. Response means stabilizing an emergency event, and recovery is in reference to the steps to build back better after an event. Again, the content of the safety element is addressing these 4 categories. And now I'll turn it over to Elizabeth, who will launch a brief poll for us. You will see a box pop up on your screen that will have questions listed here on the slide. So please do not X out of that polling box so that you can participate.
All right, and well, there comes our first poll right there. And we'll give everyone just a moment to go ahead and click on these and vote. All right, we're at 30%. All right, we'll give you about 20 more seconds. All right, I'm going to end the polling. Oh, we still have more coming in. There we go. Okay. All right, so we can share those results there. Just to kind of break it down, you can see how everyone has responded. Here, plenty of households have air filters. Lots of you have a cool place to go during an extreme heat event. Many of you have a plan for an emergency event. It seems like actually for the awareness of the evacuation routes, not as many people are aware. And many of you do feel the city is prepared in the event of an emergency. But yeah, many of those, there's lots of no's in these as well. So that's good to consider. All right. So now we're just going to get into an overview of what a housing element is and why we're updating the housing element and what some of those components are. So I just want to start off with some housing element basics. So what is a housing element? The housing element, it's essentially an action plan. It contains goals, policies, and recommended actions to address the comprehensive housing needs of the city at all income levels. So when I say comprehensive housing needs, we're looking at housing needs related to large families, seniors, renters, homeowners, those experiencing homelessness, and so forth. So this is really a comprehensive plan for housing. The housing element is one of the mandatory elements of the city's general plan, as was discussed earlier. And all cities are required by state law to update their housing element every 8 years. The housing element is guided by state law and is subject to state approval. And we're entering the 6th update to the housing element. So we refer to this as the 6th cycle. So this isn't new for the city of Lomita. This is actually your 6th update. And the sixth cycle covers the period of 2021 to 2029, which officially begins in October. And one thing I want to note is the role of the housing element in the general plan. While the housing element is separate from the other elements of the general plan, in the sense that each element is like a chapter of a book, all of the elements are internally consistent and collectively guide the vision of the plan, which really goes back to what Heidi was saying about the importance of a balanced community. All right, so we know that the housing element is a plan, but what really goes into a housing element? Well, there are several components of the housing element, and the purpose of these components is to assess what the housing needs are, identify barriers to meeting those needs and how we can address those barriers, and then to identify opportunities for those needs to be met, which includes identifying sites where development is allowed. As part of this process, the state identifies a housing unit target that the region's planning agency divides among all of the cities in the area. The city then has to plan for what's considered Lomita's fair share of the region's housing need, which Sherry's going to go into further detail into for us in just a moment, but just so we're getting familiar with that terminology. And I just want to point out that while each city is required by law to plan for housing, the city is not the developer and does not build the housing. Rather, the city provides a process by which developers can apply to build within the city. So getting back to the housing element, this is a plan that lays out the goals and actions to be implemented over the next 8 years. And those goals and actions are informed through the identification of barriers and needs. And then before I pass things over to Sherry, who's really going to dive into all of the details for us, I just want to give you a high-level overview of what our schedule looks like. So we're currently in phase 2, so it's outlined in this orange dotted box here. And we're gearing up to get into phase 3 of our schedule. So we've done a lot of our existing conditions and background work, and we're working to really refine that work now. Throughout this process, the public engagement component will continue. So we really kicked things off with the online survey. Then I'm sure some of you met with city staff out at the farmers market on Sunday. I saw that some of you, your favorite thing to do in Lomita is go to the farmers market. And now we're here today with our first virtual workshop. So next steps will include preparation of the draft housing element and a second workshop, which will likely take place at the end of June. Those of you that are signed up to receive email notifications from the city, you can expect notification of all future public events via email, and all items will be posted on the city's website as they become available. Also, if you registered to this webinar today with your email address, we're going to be sure to add you to the notification list. So just keep an eye out in your email inbox and you'll be getting those updates as they become available. Okay, so now Sherry's going to get us into the local details of the housing element.
It's always that first thing. You have to unmute yourself so people can hear you, right? So thank you, Elizabeth. I appreciate all the information you provided so far. So let's talk a little bit about how the numbers work. With the state of California, over many years, they've been concerned that we've not been keeping up with all the housing production. And so they have required housing elements to be prepared. As Elizabeth mentioned, we're now in our 6th element cycle. And leading to this point, the state has identified that we're about 3.4 million houses short in terms of being able to meet the needs of our population. So they've gone through the demographics, they've looked at our growth projections, and they've identified how many of those units need to be distributed between the different regional areas of California. Now, for our area, we're represented by the Southern California Association of Governments. They in turn go through a process where, again, they look at how we commute back and forth to our works, where our population's located, where we think the growth is going to occur, and then they allocate those numbers to the different cities. So for SCAG, they actually represent 191 cities, so it's a very big area. And there's always a discussion about how do you provide for kind of the fair sharing of this housing. In the past, it used to get pushed out more towards San Bernardino and Riverside, but I think now the concern seems to be trying to keep the housing where the people currently are with their employment. So we're seeing more of a push to bring this housing back into Los Angeles, back into our urbanized areas. Next slide. So this kind of represents how the numbers work for Lomita in comparison to everyone else. SCAG actually had about 1.3 million housing units to divvy up. You can see Los Angeles County received the vast majority at about 812,000. Lomita received 829 units. But in reality, we're going to plan for a little bit more than that. The way that the state law works, we have to meet that minimum standard of 829, but there's something called no net loss. So let's say, for example, a developer is allowed to build 20 units on a property, but they decide to build only 15. Well, now we're short 5 units. We have to make it up somewhere else. So while we're going through this planning process, we want to make sure we give ourselves a little bit of a comfort level, a little bit of insurance. So we're going to plan for closer to 1,000 units, somewhere between 900 and 1,000. So that way, as we go through these 8 years, if we find that there's some changes that occur, we're still going to have some comfort that we'll be in compliance with the state law. Now, these are the numbers that have actually been provided to Lomita. You can see that we have 829 units, but they've been broken up into different affordability levels. The state recognizes that if the marketplace just does what the marketplace does, we typically get above moderate income, which are the more expensive units, and it doesn't take care of the people who have a little bit more financial need. So we have represented, the various income categories, and this is based on the average median income. So we have very low, low, moderate, and above moderate. And about 50% of our RENA, about 44%, is actually dedicated to the very low and low income. This is a challenge, but there are ways that we will try to make this work. And I want it to be understood what we mean when we're talking about various affordability levels. In reality, many of the people who live in Lomita already would qualify as low income. Our median income in Lomita is probably somewhere around 72,000 for a typical family household. And our households are about 2.5 persons per household on average. So just looking at this chart, you may recognize either yourself, a family member, or a neighbor who would already qualify within one of these income categories. So it's important for us not just to plan for those who want to come to Lomita, who may be able to afford it, but for those who want to stay in Lomita and need to have a little bit more assistance in terms of the housing being affordable. Next slide. So with this slide, you can see in terms of the amount of housing that's been developed over the years, back in the 1970s, we actually did a fairly good job in the state of California and also within the SCAG region of building housing. So about 1 house for every, almost 2 people. But then when we start getting into the more recent time, we had more population than the housing that was being developed. The next slide really shows how that works for Lomita. So in Lomita, most of our housing was actually built in the 50s and 60s. The turquoise, kind of the teal color, is what represents Lomita, and SCAG is being represented in the gold color. And you can see we had this real peak in the 50s and 60s, and this was a lot of single family development with some apartments as well. You may see that we have apartments scattered through the city. There are some distinct areas where we have apartments, like upon Narbonne, but also within our neighborhoods, we have a lot of apartments. And that's because before we incorporated in 1964, the County of Los Angeles had zoning authority, and they did allow for a lot more apartments in Lomita. When we incorporated, we changed that. We changed some of our zoning in order to maintain the single family character of the community. But as we've started looking at the data, we do realize that there's just some inherent problems here in Lomita. We do have some issues with overcrowding, where we have maybe multi-generational, we have people who are sharing homes and there's more people than you would typically expect. There are some changes in the population. We have a lot more older adults. In fact, we see the population from 55 to 65 years of age actually being the population that's growing the most here in Lomita. And with affordability, I don't think that's much of a question. I think we've seen that throughout the state, that housing costs continue to go up, and it becomes more and more difficult for people to stay, as well as for those who are trying to come into the community. And housing supply, you'll see some slides in a few minutes, and you'll see that we just haven't been keeping up with production. But in terms of our population, given that we have not been producing a lot of houses, there's really not a big surprise that our population hasn't grown much either. Lomita, for the most part, is fairly flat. We've had, a couple hundred change here and there, but for the most part, we're about 20,500 people who live within the community. What I find interesting with this slide is if you look at the graph, and remember the teal color is Lomita, the gold is for the Skag region, which represents the 6 counties. The majority of Lomita's housing stock is actually rental. Our owner occupied is about 47.5%. Now, early on in Lomita's early days, just after incorporation and up through the 90s, the vast majority of our population was actually owner occupied, but you can see that started changing in 2000. And in the most recent years, it is significantly renters who are coming into Lomita. And you wonder, why does that happen? And I think there's probably 2 reasons for that. One goes to affordability. If you're moving into Lomita and you can't afford either, the condominiums or the houses that are for sale, by default, you have to become a renter. But I think the other thing that's happened in Lomita is because we have such a good reputation of being kind of a small town, very well received. Everybody likes Lomita. It's actually been a really good area for investors. So some of our properties where we have several houses on a single family property, or if we have apartments, more and more investors have been buying into Lomita, and then that starts transitioning what used to be owner occupied back into rental. And again, this shows kind of where our housing stock is in Lomita. And again, comparing us to Skag, we're not really that dissimilar from the region. We do have predominantly single-family homes within our community, but still a fair number of multifamily homes. And then you'll notice on the right-hand side of the screen, we do have mobile homes here within Lomita. We actually have 15 mobile home parks within the community. Some of them may not necessarily be qualified as mobile home parks because they have a lot of recreational vehicles and travel trailers. So they are from earlier days when property was so inexpensive that sometimes we had these kind of temporary housing being provided, but they ended up becoming permanent. So, but quite a number of mobile home parks in comparison to other communities. In terms of the rental rates here in Lomita, we've always been considered to be affordable. That's changing a little bit now just because of the demand for rental properties. I was on Zillow and Redfin and some of the other websites just recently looking to see what available rentals there were in Lomita. And I was surprised how expensive it's become. 1-bedroom units are now on average about $1,700 per month. And then the 2 bedrooms are almost $2,400 per month. If you consider how much people are making, that becomes very inaccessible if you are working in a grocery store or you're working in a manufacturing plant. You have to have a fairly significant income to be able to afford some of the apartments these days. But saying that, though, the majority of our households, who have been here for a while, they're still spending approximately 30% of their income towards their housing costs. But we do find about 22.8% are spending over 50% of their gross income on their housing costs. And that's considered to be an extreme burden. Generally, the goal is that you want your residents to be paying about 30%. And that would be for either the rent, the utilities, all the things that create the household expense. When it starts getting 30 to 50, that starts getting a little tight, but when it's over 50, you have an imbalance in your housing stock. So where are we today? If you just look at the colors on the map, you can see that the gold and kind of that yellowish green color, that's really where our low density neighborhoods are located. And that's the vast majority of Lomita. We have about 65% of our properties who are designated for single family or low density residential. We have about 18% of the land that does allow currently for multifamily. And that's predominantly, along kind of south of Pacific Coast Highway along Narbonne. There's some pocket areas that you see in brown. Along Narbonne, kind of the purple color, that allows for multifamily. It's in a mixed use corridor at 22 units per acre. We also have along Lomita, there's an area that's in purple that allows for multifamily with mixed use. at 22 units per acre. So there are some areas that we already have multifamily kind of spread throughout. And about 94% of all of our housing was built before 1980. So most of what you see in the community has been here for a while. So how do we actually build housing? Elizabeth mentioned this early, that the city of Lomita, we're not a developer. We're not going to go out and build housing. We do have a housing authority, so I will take back that we have one property that we developed, but that's actually under the authority of the housing authority, and that's the Lomita Manor, which provides affordable housing for seniors. But it's really up to the private market to build the housing, and we know that that can be somewhat difficult, especially when we start asking for affordable housing to be incorporated within the number of units to be developed. So there are ways that we can try to create some incentives. One of them is with some public funds. Now, Lomita doesn't really have the money to do this ourselves, but the state, and in some cases the county, and there may be some private resources that will allow some incentives for affordable housing to be constructed. And that can be done in a number of different ways in terms of either 100% affordability or inclusionary housing. One of the things that Lomita can do, and I think this is a really good opportunity for us, is that we can set the stage for housing developers. One is to have a good general plan where we're really understanding what our needs are. We're providing very clear direction as to our goals and our objectives, and then putting it through our zoning ordinance to make sure that the rules can easily be followed and there's a clear understanding about what it takes to actually build. There's also a tool called a specific plan, and this has been used once in Lomita. That was for the Pasern development that's on the corner of Crenshaw and Lomita. But that's where you can tailor make the requirements so that there's mutual benefit both for the community as well as for the developer. It often means that there's more density being provided, but it also means that there's more community benefits coming back as well. So that's a tool that we'll be looking at in order to kind of make sure we get what we want. We're kind of going fishing for development. We want to make sure we get the best quality. But I do think that Lomita has the ability to promote better development and be able to provide for more affordable housing to meet both the current needs, but also the future needs of the community. And zoning is certainly the incentive that we can use to make that happen. Now, when we talk about housing types, there's different scales, different densities that we often see in our communities. And they're provided so that we meet the needs of a broad base of our members. Some people need to live in a single family house, or they want to live in a single family house. Others really want to live in something that has a little bit more affordability, or it has more amenities that you would typically find in a mid-rise in an apartment building. But we can certainly provide for all of these range of housing. Providing it provides local employers also with the ability to have kind of a broad range of employees that they can pull from as well. So just a few images. I think we all kind of know what these things look like, but to kind of remind ourselves, one of the things we'll be seeing a lot of in the next couple of years and probably the indefinite future is kind of a resurgence of what we used to call guest houses or granny flats. They're now called accessory dwelling units. There have been some changes in the state law, so now these are permitted by right in our residential zones. And we've definitely had a lot of people coming in asking questions and quite a number of people building accessory dwelling units. So we want to provide good guidelines and maybe some design standards so that we are able to get accessory dwelling units that are a benefit to the neighborhood as well as to the person who's living in them. And that would be encouraging proper setbacks, parking if it's available, and just generally something that's attractive and will provide high value. Our single family neighborhoods, while we don't expect to have a lot more single family developed, there is some opportunity with our oversized agriculture and single family properties to maybe allow for more detached structures, which will be single family. But we'll be looking at some design standards for that as well. Multifamily, there is opportunity for some infill development. So we will be considering where that's best to be located. The same thing is true with our mixed use development. And using specific plans, we may look at high density multifamily where it's appropriate. So probably the areas that will be best suited for new development will be on the major corridors. We've heard already from the community that they want to protect the neighborhoods. And we do too. I mean, it makes sense. That's what Lomita has always been known for. So when we look at Lomita Boulevard, as well as Narbonne and Pacific Coast Highway, these are major corridors that have transportation. They have access to public transit. They're relatively walkable. So they have some amenities that I think would be appropriate. But we're just starting to go through what we consider our site inventory, trying to understand where we're going to find those 829 to 1,000 new units. And we know that there's other sites within the community as well. So the purpose of the workshop today is really to share information with you and to hopefully get your insight as to where you'd like to see your community grow. And at this point, I'm going to pass it back to Elizabeth. She's got another live poll for you.
Okay, thanks so much, Sherry. And I just want to remind everyone, we do have the Q&A available, and I do see your questions coming in, and we are going to get to those. We're going to have a public comment period coming up in just a moment. But first, we're going to launch our second poll, our second and final poll. And we just want you to consider areas that you might like to see new housing in Lomita. So we kind of have this general map up here that we're also going to use, but we're going to go ahead and launch that second poll. There it is. So, and you can select more than one if you're interested. And then we'll give this poll about a minute to give everyone a chance to respond. And then after we end this poll, we're going to try that annotation feature one more time. I know that it worked for a few of you. So we're actually going to draw on this map. So if there are some selections that aren't in the poll that you would also like to be considered, you can you can either type within the Q&A, of course, we'll accept comments there as well, or you can type on the screen, or you can either use the stamp or the draw annotation feature. So if you remember, that's up in the view options, annotate, and it will open up that other panel, and we'll let you draw right on this screen. So let's see, we'll give just another 10 seconds or so for the poll, and then we'll end that. Okay, most people participated. That's great. All right, so let's share the results that we're seeing here today. So most of you are interested in Lomita Boulevard East. So kind of this area that we had circled over here, but definitely a lot of interest in all these areas. So I'm glad that people seem satisfied with that. And then yeah, I'm just going to give you all a moment if you want to try that annotation feature again, and if you want to draw on this map that we have available, please feel free to go ahead. And just to mention, this meeting is being recorded, so we'll have all of this information that we can refer back to, and it's going to be posted on the city's website where everyone will have access to this. All right, well, maybe everyone's a little bit shy on the annotation feature. That's okay. Understandable. So yeah, I think what we'll do next is we will open our formal public comment. And I'd just like to remind everyone that you can, of course, we're going to respond to the Q&A questions, but also if you raise your hand, you can be unmuted. And then, of course, once I unmute you, you will also have to unmute yourself on your end. So that's something to keep in mind. So I'll keep an eye out for any hands raised. And in the meantime, I can go through the Q&A. All right, so I'll start from the top here. What's the latest on the local water? Was the contamination problem fixed? Last I checked, our water TDS is in the 300s, total dissolved solids.
I'm looking to see if Lena is going to answer this, but I will add one thing to begin with, is that the city of Lomita is well aware of some of the concerns that were raised regarding the water quality. And just recently, the city has approved a number of projects that will improve the water quality. So those are well under the way. And Lena, perhaps you have a little bit more information, because I know we've posted a lot of information both on our website as well as within our newsletters.
Yes, exactly. That's I was going to add to that and just say, yes, the city recently kicked off the installation of the GAC filtration system at the Cypress Water Facility. That project is going to take approximately 12 months to complete. So the city is working on that as well. And then we do have the lomitawater.com website where updates are regularly posted there as well.
Okay, perfect. I'll move on to the next one. Let's see, and I think that Sherry already answered this, but we can just recap. What regional agency did you use in phase 1 to determine Lomita's housing need?
Right, we did work with the Southern California Association of Governments as it pertains to the regional housing needs assessment. And they worked over a number of years in order to basically come up with the calculations of how they were going to distribute the units. I will note a couple of things though, because I know that there's been a lot of discussion about RENA and whether or not it was applied in a fair manner. I think for the most part, many cities have felt that the numbers are much larger than they needed to be. There are some concerns that the population growth has been miscalculated either by the state or by others, possibly at SCAG. But regardless, we've gone through the appeal process. We are now in a position where we're obligated to perform. So we need to do our best efforts to be able to meet the RENA calculations and to apply the 829 within the Lomita community. For the city council, they had a number of meetings where they discussed this. And they recognize that it's kind of like swimming upstream. After a while, you realize that you're not going to gain anything by continuing to argue. So they are going to use their best efforts. And we do believe here in Lomita that there are opportunities for housing. You know, our current zoning has certain capacity for new units, but we will need to look at potentially rezoning some areas to provide for higher density. And once we come up with a good formula, and we're able to have good communications with the community, I think we'll be able to find that the numbers are achievable.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Sherry. Oh, let's see. And we do have one hand up. I have more questions as well, but I have Joe and Julie, and I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. So if you can unmute yourself on your end and go ahead.
Hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you so much. So it pertained to that last question. That's why I raised my hand. So just a couple of things. You know, we understand what the state of California is mandating at this point. So we understand that you're not the enemy. Okay, so but there is, you know, a sense here in Lomita that it is, you know, a very small city if you look at square mileage, right? And it seems right now there are traffic concerns, other infrastructure concerns with streets, you know, that are highly traveled. And so now increasing this density, how are we going to, as a city, accommodate the density? And then also, I'm assuming there has to be an infrastructure plan to go along with that to accommodate that density. Is that being planned as well?
Yeah, I had a hard time hearing all of the question, but I believe the question was, how do we maintain our small town feel? And how do we make sure that we provide for the infrastructure needs when we do have the density being developed? And, you know, there will certainly be consideration about what we need to do for any of the streets that start having a lot more new development to make sure that the traffic capacity has been addressed. In some cases, the city may have to plan for more improvements. There may be some streets that are not completely widened, that don't have all of the, you know, the right turn lanes or the signals or the traffic stop signs or things that they need. So that will be part of the process. We realize that, you know, just because we come up with the areas where we think the housing needs to go, we still need to plan for how to do that in a way that's appropriate. We actually will have about 3 years to implement the housing element in terms of deciding, you know, what types of ordinance amendments and other documents need to happen. But it's certainly in our best interest and certainly our goal to make sure that we accommodate the infrastructure as well as the housing.
All right, we've got some more hands up, so I'm going to keep unmuting people. Stephen Camerata, go ahead and unmute yourself, please.
I actually had that question answered, so I don't have another question at this time.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
All right, and then I've got Scott Fellows next. Please unmute yourself.
Yeah, my concern is, and I've expressed this to people in the city of Lomita before, I'm concerned about that, the intersection of Lomita and Crenshaw with that 5-story, 220 unit condos going up. The street is already getting crazy. And when Chick-fil-A opens up, I know that's the city of Torrance. And then you got Amazon distribution and whatever center over there where the old Costco used to be. I'm just worried about the traffic, just handicapping everybody. I don't see how you can get down, go, north and south on Crenshaw. When you get near Lomita Boulevard, you got Torrance Crossroads, and then it's just the whole parking situation. I understand people have to live, and I don't want to kick people out of the city, but I'm just, what are you going to do about the traffic? How's that going to be somehow made to be reasonable?
Well, that's a really good question. When we go through the entitlement process for new development, we utilize a process called the California Environmental Quality Act, and it often requires a traffic study to be performed. So we actually look at existing conditions, we project what's going to be developed within the short term and the long term, and then we try to identify if there's reasonable mitigation measures, if there's something that can be done to update the traffic signal, whatever it might be. So that has been done for the projects that are currently under development. But I'll be honest with you. I mean, when you have a city that's already well developed and has a lot of people driving through it, sometimes there's not a lot more you can do to increase the flow of traffic. But we do our best in terms of mitigation and then providing alternatives. So maybe there's other streets that can be used as well. But as you start having more commercial development and residential development, there will be increased usage of the street. We'll just try to figure out the best ways to make it work.
Perfect. Thank you, Sherry. And we have one more hand up, and then we can get back to the Q&A. Stephen Camerata, go ahead and unmute yourself, please.
Again, it was somewhat answered, but I was asking if you could review the annotation because I couldn't see it on my screen.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. All right, so I think we can go back into the Q&A that we have here. Some easy ones here. Is there a code for granny houses in Lomita? And is it going to be a special code for tiny houses or granny houses? Tiny houses or granny houses is the new trend for seniors and helping with housing.
Well, that's a great question. We're actually in the process of updating our zoning ordinance so that we can deal with accessory dwelling units. And we actually want to be more creative and not just call them ADUs, but also provide some, different types of housing that meets like the tiny houses, the granny houses, all the things that we've called them in the past. Currently, we're using the state law for accessory dwelling units, and it has minimum standards. But there are ways of being able to create design standards that hopefully will provide better guidance. Greg and I have been talking about it recently because we see opportunities even for some of the newer single family homes that are being created. There's no reason why they can't create kind of a little lock-off unit, kind of like the grandma's unit that gets attached to the house. But the person who lives there, as they're aging in place, they can rent that out separately, or they can have family members live there. It's nice to be able to have transitional housing so that it can be used in a variety of different ways. So we're going to try to create better techniques to be able to help developers do that here in Lomita.
All right. And let's see. I think that this is actually a good one. How many of the 829 units are already under development?
Well, luckily, we're already well under our way in meeting some of these requirements. If you think about the Precern development, it has 220 units. And because it received its building permit last year, it actually qualifies under this cycle of the housing element. Now, Precern does not include any affordable housing, so it actually falls within the above moderate category. So we need a little over 300 units in the above moderate, and they're already going to provide the 220. So I don't think we're going to have much problem meeting that category. And we also still have some other development along Narbonne. There's the Brownstone project, which provides both mixed use as well as new condominiums. And soon we'll have another project right behind Project Barley, which is another 16 condominiums. So those are all above moderate. So again, I don't think we're going to necessarily have a problem in the higher range. It's trying to target the lower range where we have the low, very low, moderate, and special needs housing. And I think we'll probably start looking at opportunities both for inclusionary housing as well as maybe, some zoning that would require and or incentivize the affordable.
Perfect. And we do have Stephen and Scott both have their hands up, and we have more questions to get to. So we'll go back to Stephen one more time. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Stephen.
I don't know why I can't get the handle lower. I don't have any more questions.
Oh, okay, so sorry. I won't unmute you again.
Doesn't want to lower my hand. I don't know why.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Steve. All right, and then we've got Scott Fellows. Let's see. Go ahead, Scott.
I'm unmuted. I just wanted to say I wasn't able to participate, I guess, in that first question about what do you like about Lomita? And, we've lived in this area here for, in Marble Estates for, 18 plus years. We raised our kids at all the local schools in Torrance. But one of my most favorite things to do is to go to St. Margaret Mary Catholic Church, which is on Eshelman. And it's just a great church full of a lot of great people, the men's clubs, all the lectors. I'm one of the lectors at the Sunday masses. And, I just enjoyed the whole church thing, and all the people that are involved with that particular church is just a great time. And we all like the city of Lomita. It's very casual and fun. And, I like driving up and down Lomita Boulevard, and sometimes we go down Narbonne and turn on 235th Street. But point being, though, is that I like the city of Lomita a lot. And I just want to see things, continue to be okay and better than okay. And just the traffic thing on Crenshaw and all that crazy stuff on Hawthorne Boulevard by Raising Cane's. They had to put in a double turn lane. They're chipping away at the sidewalk so people can find some way to scoot in easier to get in there. And it's just all this traffic and congestion and stuff. And I just want this to be a fun, relaxed, and profitable area, not just something where everybody's got to figure out how they're going to get down to the store. Anyway, that's my story, and I just appreciate everybody in Lomita, and I like social workplace. Eric and Heidi that run it. I've been to mixers there. We've done food there. I've just enjoyed the heck out of everything in Lomita. I just concerned about that 5-story dwelling going up and 440 cars if there's two cars per unit. And, maybe not everybody drives a car all the time, but it's like, yikes. So I just want to think the quality of life just continue to be as good as it is now. That's all.
Thank you, Scott. All right, and then we'll keep going through the Q&A. Let's see, I'll keep going from the top, but I hope everyone sticks around because we do have some great questions as we keep going down. How will you prevent people that want a small community, a nice place to raise their families, low density from leaving?
I think the main focus is preserving the character of the community. I think just as our last speaker, Scott said, people appreciate Lomita. They appreciate the people, the places, the experiences that they have here. And I don't think anybody wants that to change. So even though we may need to incorporate more density, more population growth, that doesn't mean that we will change as a community. Lomita does a great job with its parks and recreation. It does a great job in reaching out and making sure people link together. And just because we have more people here, that won't change.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. Will we get a grocery store in the old Bilo spot? We really need one again.
Well, I certainly hope so, because that's where I used to shop. And so now I have to go much further to get my groceries. We've had a number of conversations with the property owner. And one of the issues that we had in the past is that you actually had multiple owners. The parking lot was owned by somebody different than the actual grocery store. It didn't make a lot of sense. They're now trying to consolidate the ownership so that there's more control over their future. But in reality, the problem that we have is that there's not a lot of grocery stores that want to expand. They're already kind of serving the area on the outskirts. So to be able to attract them in is a little bit of a trick. But the Albertsons, when it was at that location, it was actually profitable. It did well. It was only because we had some failed attempts afterwards that things kind of fell apart. So, Greg and the city manager and certainly the city council, they're looking at some economic development tools to try to attract a grocery to that location. We're also suggesting too that if we improve our housing stock and we increase the number of basically buyers, people who can come to that location, that we should be able to support a grocery store there. So that's a goal that will be worked on over the next couple of years.
Perfect. All right. Why does the mixed use overlay on Narbonne not extend up to the north end of Narbonne within the city of Lomita?
The mixed use corridor in Narbonne does extend past Lomita Boulevard, but it doesn't go all the way up to the very top. And, I wasn't here at the city when they did the mixed use corridor, but I can understand that part of their goal was really to preserve the downtown commercial area. Right around City Hall, there's a number of commercial properties, and I think the city saw that as an opportunity to kind of create a commercial core. And when you sometimes put mixed use as part of that, you may not necessarily get all the commercial that you want. But as we're going through this housing element, we realize that we need to go back and rethink all of the zoning that's occurred in the past to see, does it still apply? Is it still really what the community goals are? Or should we allow for more mixed use along Narbonne and maybe even in other areas of the community?
Perfect. And this next one, I'm happy to help you if you'd like me to, Sherry. Do you have any idea what is the vacancy rate in Lomita? Is this going to be considered in our housing mandate?
Well, actually, because you've been working on the statistics recently, you'll know that answer.
Yes. So I don't have the exact number, but I know it's less than 5%. And 5% is what is generally considered to be a healthy vacancy rate. So when you have a healthy vacancy rate, that means that people have options for moving. Maybe their family's growing and they need a larger place to live or something like that, or they're in the market looking for something new. Within a healthy market, you would have those options and you would have a 5% or higher vacancy rate. And within Lomita, it's lower than 5%. As far as the housing mandate, as far as the specific unit target, that's already been determined. And that's been determined through the state and through that regional process that we discussed. But yes, absolutely, we're looking at the needs of larger families as well as singles and smaller families as well. All right. We'll go on to the next one. Developers are the driving force behind increasing our housing. How are we encouraging developers to build in Lomita?
Well, I know Greg has not been here very long, but I'm going to let Greg take the first shot at answering this question because I know he has some ideas in terms of outreaching to the builders.
Yeah, thank you, Sherry. Appreciate the opportunity here. Good question. It's a matter of outreach. I mean, us reaching out to you guys about the housing element is to make sure that we have community buy-in in terms of location of where we locate these things, these new housing units. When it comes to incentivizing developers to build, we go through a similar process. We are looking at economic development opportunities, things where the city can potentially partner with the developer, if it means something that's strategic. And we're not in the business of making money, we're not in the business of developing, but if we can get a community benefit and the developer can get his project going, and it's a win-win. So we're exploring all those opportunities.
Perfect. Thank you, Greg. All right, we'll keep going. Lomita has numerous agricultural lots, which are large lots. The cost of rezoning these lots to accommodate multiple family housing is costly. What can the city do to assist landowners with rezoning these lots?
Henry, I think that's really a great question because we've been looking a lot at the agricultural zone. And in reality, most of the agricultural properties have already been developed as kind of traditional single family, but we still have some oversized huge areas in the back that haven't been developed. There's still a few people that have barn-like structures. I'm not sure we have too many horses or other types of farm animals here still, but there's still opportunity for development within that agricultural zone. One of the things we'll be looking to do is to encourage some of the property owners, if they happen to have two properties side by side that can be redeveloped, I think the city would be willing to take on the rezoning so that the property owner doesn't have to pay for that. But then we would ask for more of a coordinated development. Some of these properties are very narrow. They may only be, 60, 70 feet width, but they're 200, 300 feet in depth. That's kind of difficult to build on. But if you have two property owners willing to work together, you can create almost like the courtyard housing, areas where you have open space and you still have parking. They're much more efficient. So if we find property owners willing to do that, I think you'll find the city as being a partner as well in trying to lessen the development burden in terms of us taking on responsibility for zoning in the general plan.
All right, thank you, Sherry. All right, and how do we prevent our city from becoming the next harbor city? Will the community be a part of coming up with adjusting the general plan?
Harbor City has some good areas, but it certainly has some areas that are underperforming, that are more blighted, that certainly have more public safety concerns. Lomita has never really had that reputation. We have strong community support, both in the neighborhoods as well as on the entire city, perspective. I don't see adding housing as being something that's going to degrade that quality within the community. But saying that, I think it's important for us to continue to work together. I think the opportunity for Neighborhood Watch, for more community meetings in collaboration with our commissions and our city council, that will help make sure that we maintain those standards. And as Greg was indicating in the very beginning, the city hasn't done a comprehensive update to the general plan since 1998. So when that does occur, and I would hope it would occur maybe in the next 2, 3, 4 years, it's going to require a lot of community participation. So everybody will have their 2 cents or their nickel in that discussion.
All right, thank you, Sherry. Are you planning to have any sort of public transportation or free trolleys?
Lomita's pretty small. I don't know if we would actually have any type of free trolleys, but we have a lot of public transit that already comes through our community between the Torrance bus line, the MTA. So we will continue to collaborate with them to make sure that the bus lines are well served within Lomita. Most of the major streets already have buses. And if there's going to be increased development, both within our community and frankly, all of the surrounding communities are doing the same thing. Being able to rely upon public transit, I think, is going to be very helpful. We also know that sometime in the future, we're going to have the extension of the Green Line into Torrance. So being able to connect to the rail lines will be a key opportunity as well. So there will be lots of collaborative discussions with the South Bay Cities Council of Governments, which represents all of the South Bay cities, but also with LA County to make sure that we look at the transportation dollars that are available to make sure that these lines are really working.
All right, I'm loving these questions. This is a really thoughtful group that we have here. We've got 4 more. Has the city identified any preliminary potential sites for new development on Lomita, PCH, Narbonne, or other locations?
We're just in the beginning stages of looking at available property or the opportunity sites, as I would call them. DUDEC has been doing an analysis where they're looking at properties that are underdeveloped, underutilized, and that's typically a ratio of the value to the amount of development that occurs on the properties. So that's kind of our first phase going through. But then secondly, we're looking to see where the larger properties are that it can actually accommodate good quality development. If we just have small properties, sometimes you get a little bit of a hodgepodge type of development. So we're looking at large sites, and that typically means it's going to be on Lomita and Pacific Coast Highway. There are a number of properties that are just kind of obvious, but others that are not so obvious, but with assembly could work. At our next workshop in June, we'll actually be sharing that information with you.
Thank you. All right, what is the action plan for the growth of the population experiencing homelessness that we've been seeing in our neighborhood?
It is difficult to be able to address the homeless issue on a small basis. It really is kind of a sub-regional and a regional issue. We do work with a number of different organizations. PATH is one of them, working with the LA County Sheriff's Department and others within the county structure. Lomita does have a responsibility for providing for the very low income and the special needs population. So it is possible that we may have a nonprofit or another developer who is able to provide for the needs. And if so, we will try to accommodate. We'll try to make sure we have a good site for that. But at this point, we don't have any specific plans or any specific projects.
All right. Is it possible to mix the different income levels of in one development? This might be a better and more thoughtful approach to accommodate different income levels. This will also avoid having concentration of lower income housing.
Absolutely. And many cities are starting to look at what they call inclusionary housing. So it's kind of an incentive program where if you give the developer more density, in exchange, they provide more affordable housing. Now, it happens in two ways. In one way, the state already requires us to do that. If a developer voluntarily comes in and says, I'm willing to do some affordable housing, we have to provide a density bonus. But on the other hand, the city can actually make it part of its ordinance. And we can say that densities of a certain level, let's say 30 units, 40 units, whatever it may be per acre, that you're required to do inclusionary housing. If you don't start creating some type of strategy, frankly, you'll never be able to provide the units and you'll fall further and further behind. Now, I know Greg, when he was working up in Northern California, he also worked in some programs that provided inclusionary housing. So I don't know if you want to provide maybe a couple of your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you, Sherry. Essentially, state density bonus law is a really good mechanism to get that mix. Essentially, we look at what a specific property could accommodate. We call that the base density, say it's 100 units. And the developer says, I want to provide 20% for the very low income. Well, then they get a certain percentage of a bump up in density to accommodate that. And they can absolutely mix the unit types from very low to low. The one thing that the state does get involved with is that you can't locate all of your affordable units in one tower, and you can't make them all studios and the rest of the units are all 3 bedrooms. It has to be a percentage of like for like. If you have 10% of the entire development as being 1 bedrooms, then 10% of your affordable units can be 1 bedrooms. There's also rules about materials and finishes utilized within the unit itself. If you're using marble in one, you are allowed to use a lesser grade in the other, but it can't be a substantial downgrade. It can't be obvious that one is a lot nicer than the other, right? You can't have separate entrances, things like that. Sherry did, touch on inclusionary housing. We can either require it on every project or we can require a fee. So if they don't provide the actual housing units, then they pay a fee into the city that then goes into a coffer so that we can help possibly another developer actually produce those units.
Perfect, thank you. All right, and this is our last question. We don't have any other hands up. In your presentation, you said Lomita has 8,078 housing units, and you also stated that the vacancy rate is less than 5%, which means that the vacancy rate is somewhere between 300 and 400 units. Can this number be used to meet our goal of 800 plus units? If not, why not?
Well, the simple answer is no. We cannot use our existing housing in order to meet our future housing obligation. The state wants us to actually produce new housing. And that means if there is anything that's existing, it's already here. It already is part of our existing base. As we go forward, we need to produce more and more housing. If there's a project that actually demolishes, we have to make up that number in addition to the 829. So it's a little bit, I know it's a little bit frustrating because you're trying to accommodate a lot of different needs with what you have available. But the state's goal is to provide housing that meets all the affordability requirements so that really it's broad-based, it's inclusive, and it ultimately is a healthier community because we're just basically being open to all of the needs of the individuals as well as our families.
All right, we do have one more that just trickled in. Is the old El Dorado Hotel still being used as housing for those who were formerly incarcerated?
I'm not sure if your question is related to the Project Room Key. That was just a recent program that was trying to get the homeless off of the streets. If so, that project has actually ended. There are some projects going on within the county that are still trying to preserve and protect some of the resources that were used for the motels and hotels that were converted. But if you're also referring to motels and areas that may be used for individuals who have to register as, having a criminal record, I'm actually not familiar with that site. So I would ask if you would contact us separately. We'd be happy to look into it for you.
All right, and I'm just going to put up our slides so that everyone can jot down contact information if they need to. And Sherry, is there anything else from your team? We don't have any other questions in the Q&A.
I think just in closing, I really appreciate everybody who has been able to participate this evening. I know that some of you have had contact with us over the recent, past, and I'm sure many of you will be contacting us with more questions, and we certainly encourage you to do that. This will be kind of an organic process. We're trying to think through what the best options will be, and we don't have all of the answers, but we will be helping to develop those answers with your help. So our next workshop will be towards the end of June. And at that point, you will see a lot more information because we're going to be talking about specific sites and potentially some ordinances and policies and other types of programs that will help us not only preserve the housing that we have that we think is appropriate, but also to provide the new housing that will allow the community to grow and prosper. We appreciate the information that we received from Heidi, because I absolutely agree with her. To have a very healthy business economy, you also have to have a healthy residential neighborhood and or neighborhoods, because together it actually creates what our entire community is made of. So we look forward to you working with us and certainly look for a housing element that provides for all of our needs. And Greg, did you have any closing comments?
Just wanted to thank everybody for your time. This was actually a very, very good discussion. Great questions. I think, as we progress through this, I think we'll get some more refinement, some more details for you guys. I know this was kind of higher level today, but that's how we start, right? And it is going to be organic. So thank you so much. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you to the chamber. I think this went really well. And I really, really encourage everyone to participate in June. So thank you so much.
All right, thank you all and good night.